Alright, we be recording. We're going to do another quick drive to get some brake-in miles on this. I wanted to go over my settings. Engine braking on 1, so most engine braking. Traction control is on 2, which is the second most aggressive. It's in the track settings. ABS 2, which is least intrusive while still having IMU assisted cornering ABS. And then wheelie control is on the minimal setting. I might go and turn that off, but I actually don't mind a little bit of wheelie control, so you can just ride like a ham-fisted idiot. And you can ride out a wheelie and not have to worry about it looping. Now, I doubt that would be a problem on this bike, but I don't mind a little bit of wheelie control, especially if you hand the bike to somebody else. So, another thing I learned, this is not in restricted mode. So, I talked to a Ducati tech and a bunch of other people, and they're like, no, what the guy at the dealership told you was wrong. Sorry, Ben. Not the first time a guy at the dealership didn't know as much about the... I'm not picking on you, Ben. It applies to every salesperson. And to be fair to them, there's... You know, especially if you carry multiple brands, you have all the models and they're all different, and what might have been set up one year and might be different the next year, you know, so sometimes it might be hard to keep track of all that. Come on, jerk off. Just sitting around looking at, ooh, look at a house. Yes, it is a nice house. It's $1 million house. So, this is not in restricted mode. It's the dash that just changes colors to tell you as you get to 6,000. Like, hey, you're supposed to be braking it in soft and gentle. Let's turn yellow. But the power is actually there. So I kept saying how I felt like, it's pulling power. I think that some of that was placebo. And me also just not really wringing its neck. This bike doesn't really make a lot of power under 6,000 RPMs. In fact, up to 6,000 or 7,000 RPMs, I think the Monster actually makes more horsepower and more torque. It's from like 8,000 up to the 11.5 redline, which I haven't really been playing much up into that space, where this thing just takes off. It's like a 600 in that respect. It's not a big torque monster down low. It's, it has some, you know, it's got more torque down low than the 600, but it likes to rev. This is a very, very, for a twin, high revving twin. It is a very over square bore and stroke. And so the upside is you get an 90 degree L twin that loves to rev and screams. Again, relatively high for a twin. Obviously 11.5 is not much for, you know, an inline 4. But the redline on this is not much far off the MT10. I think that one was 12.2 or 12.5, something like that, right around a little above 12-ish. And that's an inline 4. This is a twin. So, I've been not really getting on this thing, but you know what? It's 183 miles. I'm gonna get on it. I'm normally riding it balls to the wall. By the time I've gone 125 to 150 miles, I usually give it the sign and the blessing, and all right, we're broken in. We've gone through several heat cycles. Mark at the duck shop has told us that before, you know, just get it through 3 heat cycles, get 100 miles on it, you're good to go. These motors are not like they were built in the 70s, in the 80s, or even the 90s. He's like, the way they make these things now, they're almost ready to rip right out of the box. Put 100 miles on it, make sure everything seems to be working fine, get some heat cycles in it, and just go have fun. And I've subscribed to that for years, but it's good when Mark Sutton, Brian Stokes at Triumph, when we were helping break in the Triumph demo bikes, he was like, don't be gentle. He's like, don't be an idiot, don't abuse them. But he's like, I need you to get out there and do a quick, hard break-in. Run them in. Run them through their paces. Okay. Why? Well, because they tend to run better when you do that. And I know you could say, well, yeah, but your motor blew up on the Triumph. Yeah, that motor did. But I've had 34 other bikes now. And none of them have done blown up. Shit, my original Ducati Streetfighter 1098 that I had that for about 8,000 miles. Sold that to a buddy, Reese. This was back in 2010? Or 2000... No, it was 2010, because Don and I just gotten together. I just saw that bike in for service two years ago at the dealership. Reese has been driving, I don't know if they got 60,000 miles on the goddamn thing. He commutes on it, rides the shit out of it. And that was a bike that was broken in hard. That was a 2010 model, an older model. I think it was a 2010. Anyway. I moved the bars down a tiny bit. I wanted it to be just a little bit more aggressive. If you guys have watched my other videos, I have neck issues with like a pinched nerve in my shoulder that goes into my neck. And high and wide bars tend to bother my neck more than low and narrow. Now, you get too low and narrow, that will hurt my wrists. But I rotated this down because there's some little marks there, plus 3 degrees or minus 3 degrees, and I guess one's for like road, one's for comfort, one's for track setting. I basically just rotated it down 3 degrees for the track setting. And here you're like, oh, that's like a millimeter. How much is that? Well, the millimeter out here ends up moving it down like 3 or 4 millimeters. Nothing radical. It just put them a little lower, just a little flatter. That'll be nice in the turns. But for me, when my hands are up and back, it's like my shoulder blades kind of, pinch together. If you take your arms and pull them back, your shoulders, like you're rowing something. And that seems to be when I'm stuck in that position, it pinches that nerve. And when I say it's uncomfortable, I mean it hurts, where I'm like, I got to get off the bike soon. This is like really distracting. And then I would jump onto an R1 or something where I'm like full in, and I'm like, wait, the pain's going away. This is supposed to be a torture rack. And it does torture your wrists. But it actually, by stretching and pulling my arms forward, it pulls my shoulder blades apart and kind of lets me stretch out a little bit. And it feels way better. So, anyway. Up to 100. I mean, this thing pulls really nice. So, I didn't see the rev limiter come on, so I probably didn't quite max it out, but I think I got up to like 10.5 or 11. And it's not pulling like the MT10, but it is pulling a little bit more than my Street Triple RS did. I mean, this thing just loves to rev. I love revvy twins. The Streetfighter 1098, I think only redlined at 10.5, so it didn't rev as high, but it had just massive, meaty bottom end and mid-range. This doesn't quite have this. This is the Super Quadro. It's a bit more over square. It revs up nice and freely, and it revs higher. And it will reward you, but you have to ride it a little bit like you're riding a 600. Which some people say, well, that defeats the purpose of having a twin. Maybe. I like the character and the grunt of the twin. It's nice that it does rev up though, so that it's a very accessible power plant. The V4, it's just too much, man. You'd be all over the place. Not to say it's not fun, but when you really want to get on that thing, I mean, you either need to be a rock star rider, or those electronics are going to be working double time to keep you from launching yourself into orbit. 208 horsepower on a light bike. And I looked up the specs. Ducati claims the wet weight is 441. The curb weight, so which I guess means fuel. Dry weight is 392. So it's not as light as a Street Triple RS. But compared to the MT10, it is about 25 pounds lighter, fueled up. So, well, I guess not massive, but it's a difference. But, Yeah, I guess I just wasn't getting on the gas as much before because I was like, well, what's the point? It's in restricted mode. And so I was kind of pulling it early at 9,500 or 10,000. But it's actually giving me full power. The dash is just flashing at me, telling me to knock it off. And that's what I have to go in and have him adjust the software and make sure it's got all the latest stuff, and I'll get rid of that piece. But power wheel is really nice in first and was starting to come up in second. I could see I could feel it coming up and the wheelie control kicking in. It's got good torque from 6,000 up. Before 6,000, I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of lackluster. It feels like a lumpy 600. You hit 6,000 though, it's got good torque. I've been looking at dyno charts and shit between calls all day, and the lowest I've seen for stock was MCN or Cycle World. One of those dynos had it at 130, but then other stock bikes I've seen going up to as high as 139-ish, 140. And then of course you could tune them and put a pipe and air filter and stuff and get them like mid 140s. That's a lot of power on a little bike like this. That's actually pretty impressive. Now granted, you can say, well, it's 955 cc's, it's damn near a liter bike, that's what it should make. Yeah, in an inline 4 world. But it's like 8,000, 8,500. You know, like when you're on a 600, it's like no power, then you hit like 12,000 RPMs and it's like, oh, there it is. And it's almost like a two-stroke. You get that kick. This is around 882, just over 8,000. You get one kick at 6. It's a little flat before that. It pulls, but nothing to write home about. The second you hit 6, you feel, oh, okay, there's something happening. And at 8,000-ish, you're like, okay, there it is. And from 8 to 11.5, 8,500 to 11.5, that 3,000 RPM is where this thing wants to live. If you're going to be on track, you want to go fast, you got to keep it spun up. It's not like a Super Duke. It's not like the Monster 1200, any of those kinds of machines. You got to ride this kind of like a big torquey 600. And it will reward you with a nice kick up there. And I guess I was just shying away from it. I was kind of being a little bit of a pussy. You know, it's limited. Oh, it's brand new. A couple pulls right there. I was like, nope, that's the power I was hoping to feel. So we'll go through menu settings and stuff and some other video on how I've got this all set up. But basically, I've got it in. I have my sport mode set up more like track mode. I took the stock sports settings and backed off wheelie control, backed off ABS, and backed off traction, so that some of those are now in the track recommended settings. And that's kind of where I settled with the MT10. I wanted full power, as much as I could get, but I wanted rest of the settings kind of more from the B mode. Give me just a little, kind of in between A and B. And that was a nice balance where you can feel it pull power when you're doing a wheelie and kind of puts it back down. I'm fine with that. If you want to pop the front end up, clutch it up, or power wheelie up. But you're not going to ride it all the way down the road. You're going to be up for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, and then it's going to say, all right, let's gently put it down. Instead of slamming down. It actually makes you kind of look like you know what you're doing. I could use some of that. Top speed, I've been watching some top speed videos. These things, if you're small and you can get into a tight tuck and you're brave enough on a naked bike, going 165 or whatever it was, I think I saw one guy hit an indicated 167. What that turns out to be in real world, maybe 158, 160, which is really on a naked bike with 0 wind protection. That is all you want to do, but that's still ZX6R top end speed. You know, you're still hanging with a 600. You got more power here, but the 600 doesn't need as much power up top because it's got the damned aerodynamics to just slice through the wind. And here where you lack an aero, you make up for, because the ZX6R in stock form, let's just say these days around 115. You tune it and slip on, unless you're doing velocity stacks and the whole 9 yards, you're typically looking around 118 to 120. Yeah, that's ripping up top. I saw the red light flash and I felt the rev limiter kiss for a second. Trying not to bounce it off the rev limiter, but it is a new bike. But I said yesterday it felt like it was down about, maybe they were pulling like 20 horsepower. They weren't, I was. I wasn't letting it rev out. And unlike most V-twins, if you want to get the max power, it's at almost redline. A lot of twins peak and then kind of drop down. Hypermotard was like that. It just fell off a cliff well before redline. This thing pulls right to the rev limiter. So that was on me, folks. Some other corrections to the video. These are not Brembo M50 calipers. Waiting for somebody to point that out. These are the M42s. They're not the top. So these are the third tier. It goes stylemas, and then M50s and M432s. I believe these are still these are still monoblocks. Yeah, you can see that. They're still monoblocks, still braided lines, still Brembo master cylinders for clutch and brakes, but it's not the RCS 19 that the Street Triple and Super Duke or Duke 890R get. Those do have a better master cylinder. However, that being said, these brakes, even with these pads, which are softer, less bitey pads than what the Panigale V2 gets, they're still stronger, better brakes than what the Yamaha has. They just are. They're Brembos. They're going to be a step, and the braided lines, they're going to be a step up. If I go that way, I'm going to be stuck behind them. Is what it is. I'll find a place to rip on it a little bit here and there. Suspension, still got to get that set up. Yeah, that just flies up at about 9,500 at first. Even with me leaning forward, that just came right up. Again, not as violently as the MT-10, but this bike is already impressing me. It's definitely quicker than I thought it was going to be, just based on the riding around yesterday. I was like, well, maybe they got to look at this and that. Suspension still feels good. Reminds me, I got to call Kent, set up an appointment for me, Nick, and Jimmy. We're all going to go up there to see the wonderful folks at GMD CompuTrack. So I'm gonna get some space in here so you can kind of maybe watch the dash. I'll try to keep the camera focused down there a little bit. Look out, kind of look up. But you can see where it'll start to take off in 6, and then after 8,500, man, it's just like boom, it wants to run. But even here, no, I guess I'm pointing downhill, so it's probably not fair. I was going to say, you got 5,000 RPM. You give it gas, it pulls. It's definitely got some torque. Like if you're at 4,500 on a 600, and unless you really geared it down, you'd go, whoa, it wouldn't have anything. So if I'm at like 5,000, pointing slightly uphill, good pull. It hits 6, starts to pull some more as I'm goosing it. It's definitely got good usable power. I think if you're coming off of turns and stuff, you'd want to keep the motor on the boil and not dip below 5,500. You want to keep it at least at 6. But then you get up more towards 8, which we're going to do up here. 6 has got good pull. It's just immediate. It's a nice, punchy feel. 5,500 there. We're at 5,000. Little boggy. I know there's a flat spot. I think you can tune that out with a pipe and a tune. You get to about 5,500. Definitely crawling out of that torque dip there, that flat spot. Alright, so let's get up around 8,000. Yeah. That's it. You just got to keep it where it's happy. That's where this motor likes to be. I'm not going to spend a shit ton of time there. I am going to play, but I'm not going to abuse this thing. But that's got, and also that's another thing a tune helps. Ducati limits the torque in the first 3 gears in the mid-range to make it less wheelie prone. They wanted to make it more friendly. Still pulls nice. I mean, it pulls strong. But if you get the Brand tune and you get the thing flashed, it removes all those torque limiters in the front in the first couple gears. This motor is not really detuned from the Panigale. They pull a little bit of torque in the mid-range because it's, you know, with the Panigale you're leaned over the front and it helps keep the front end down and planted. But for the rest of it, the reason that this bike only makes 153 versus 152 or 155 rather of the Panigale is because the intake, it doesn't have the ram air central intake out front. That's it. 2 horsepower peak. 2 horsepower peak difference between the two bikes. They lengthen the swing arm, I think 20 millimeters. Help keep the front planted, add in stability. But I'm telling you, man, this thing just loves to dive into turns. And it feels good when it's there. But now that I'm like actually getting on it, not pussing out, decent pull, and then, yeah, of course you're running out of runway here. But you hit that 8,000-ish, and it just wants to. And when you look at the dyno charts from Ducati, or you know anybody that testers, you can see, oh, good power, a little power, and it just shoots off like a rocket. Let's go ahead and go this way. Yeah, the handling is sublime. One thing I'm disappointed in, and it has nothing to do with the bike, it's that the fact that this bike is, and it's all set up and calibrated, all the controls, electronic systems, for a 180/60 rear tire, which means my favoriteest tire on the planet, the Michelin Road 6, I do not believe they make in that size. I'd have to go to a 190/55 to get about the same height, but then that's more weight, so... Oh, that just wants to rip. I don't know what the hell I was doing yesterday and the other day. I was like, oh, I'm not feeling as much power, I can't wait to unlock it. I guess I just had to hold the revs a little longer. Now, I did also turn down. Yeah, so even there, I was going downhill a little bit, the front tires started coming up, going downhill. And that's just because I'm just physically holding the revs longer. Before shifting it. Who would have thought if you rev it out more, it makes more power, right? Now right there, well, it still has, you know, I was gonna say, oh, it feels a little lumpy, but if you give it gas, it does have torque. It will pull out of that. You can feel it a little bit flat, but it feels flat for a V2, for an L twin. $7,000. Oh, that is lovely. Absolutely lovely. And I gotta say, for a stock exhaust, you can probably hear, yeah, it doesn't sound like the MT10 did with the Leo Vinci system. I'm kind of trying to figure out what to do for exhaust. I feel like if I do exhaust, I'll have to tune it. I think I can get Brand tune for like $700 or $800, and I think I can get an exhaust for about $800 shipped. It looks kind of like an SC Project exhaust, and with the right tune, I think I'd pick up 6-8 horsepower, and drop weight and all that. But honestly, for stock exhaust, it sounds good. It's got a good induction howl coming from somewhere up here. This feels like a really torquey Street Triple RS, which is fine because the Street Triple RS, the 765, is one of my favorite sport bikes of all time. It ain't the fastest. It's not the best at any one thing other than the fact that it's really, really good at everything. And this feels like a bit of a punched up, you know, if you took a Street Triple, gave it a nicer dash, that's one thing. Gave it a nicer dash and sent it to the gym, maybe a little steroids, I feel like that's what you would end up with. You would end up with something like this. It's got a really good sound for a stock exhaust. The suspension, which probably is way off for my weight with regards to preload and all the clickers, but it feels fantastic. It's razor sharp and agile. Yeah. It's weird because like some bikes rev so much more, I just wasn't thinking about it. But when you get like from 95 to 10.5 or from 10 to 11.5, even though your revs aren't climbing that much, maybe it's the way it's geared, but it really gives you that shove. I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna confess something here. The way I was driving it before and just really not revving it, I was kind of like, ooh, hopefully that gets unlocked with, they're right about unlocking the ECU. If not, I was gonna, part of me was having a little bit of buyer's remorse of getting rid of the MT10. As much as this thing's beautiful handling and good to look at, and I love the bike, but I was like, ooh, that might be too big of a step down in power. But now, I'm feeling, yeah, that is plenty of pull for the street. And the motor will probably loosen up a little bit in time, and I'm going to be, at some point, probably throwing an exhaust and pipe and pick up another 5.8 horsepower. Brentune claims they got theirs 147 at the wheel. Now, theirs might be reading high because their dyno had the stock one at 139 or something like that, 137, 139, right under 140. So their dyno might be reading about 5 horses high. But the point is, the gain was still substantial. Pick up an extra 6, 7, 8, 9 or whatever it was horsepower up top, and more all throughout the mid-range and more torque. That might be worth, I don't know, by the time you're done, $1,700 for exhaust and a tune. Now I could probably go with a cheaper tune like an up map, but I think that's just fueling and some ignition things. I don't think they go and they find all, it's not just, oh, let's just add a little fuel here and enrichen it up because it's lean. Let's add a couple degrees of ignition timing. They seem to actually go in and they understand how the stock software works and the torque strategies and all that shit. And they get rid of any restrictions, not just throttle position. I don't know how they do what they do, but they've got some really nice tunes, and their bikes really do seem to pull. You know, I'd go to, oh, you know what? Let's just go get some gas. Get a few more miles on this. Okay, here's the other complaint: no goddamn fuel meter, I'm sorry, no gas gauge. Like a lot of Ducatis, it just, you drive 100 miles and the gas light comes on. So So we'll go down to the QTs, just so I could rip on it a little bit more. Yeah, this thing just... first couple turns on this thing, I almost fell into the turns, because it was like, I'm going to push it in, like, you push the MT-10 in, and it was just like, poof! Like, whoa, didn't mean to go in that hard. Feel a little bit of heat on the legs. But those are all things you've heard on the other videos. This is really about just getting out, and I wanted to double check. The guy seemed very knowledgeable about not being restricted, but I'm like, I don't know, it didn't feel, and he's like, well, how much were you really getting on it? I'm like, well, I wasn't really revving it. He's like, just go ride the damn thing. So again, let's just go from 40, get down to 40 miles an hour in second. Oh, you know what? Just so it doesn't artificially, hey, you're going downhill. Let me get up here and we'll go uphill. We'll do a 40 roll. Car's catching up to me, need to go. All right, let's just see how fast it climbs to the speed. There we go. Yeah, that is a quick bike. That is a quick bike. Maybe the MT-10, I would have been 10 miles an hour faster in that short spin, but honestly, like, that was a surprisingly good pull. And all I had to do was just let it rev out. So we're going to go back to maybe babying it just a little bit, although we got over 200 miles on it. You got to think how many times a piston's gone up and down in 20 miles. A couple 100,000 times? I mean, how long does it take for pistons to really, rings to hone into the cylinder walls? And that's why I like the harder braking. Get it under more pressure, decel, engine braking, up and down. Get those things seated good and early. My bikes always seem to make really good compression. You know, really good powers. They got good compression, no blow by. They don't burn oil. If they're making good making really good power, as good as they're supposed to, or even better than they typically do. I know I got really good compression. If I got good compression, I know I got good ring seal. If I got good ring seal, then I don't have blow by contaminating my oil. And hey, dude, get on your side of the fucking. So anyway, I am muchly impressed with this. All I had to do was let it sing. Who would have thunk it? We'll see everybody later.